The warfighters aren't asking for AI. They're asking for capabilities. They want to do targeting faster. They want to fly the plane faster. Like, that's what people should care about. And if any startup entrepreneur is leading with an AI story, you're dead on arrival, because that's not actually what the most forces actually need.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley.
Ian Kalin is a renaissance man among defense tech founders. He served as a counterterrorism officer and a nuclear engineer in the U.S. Navy, and later went on to serve as one of the first Presidential Innovation Fellows, as well as the Chief Data Officer at the Department of Commerce. His parallel career in the private sector included becoming the managing director of a supply chain market intelligence company, a consultant to Google, and a product management leader at a data business called Socrata. He understands government product development and sales from every angle. He's fought plenty of battles, and he has the scars to show. Today, he joins us on this episode to talk about his newest venture, Turbine One, and the path they're blazing through the frozen middle to deliver edge AI to the U.S. warfighter. Let's dive in. All right, Ian Kalin, CEO and founder of Turbine One. Super excited for this conversation, man. Thank you for making time. Ian has probably one of the most eclectic backgrounds of any defense tech founder that we've spoken to on this show, and that's a high bar. From playing music in bars to serving as a chief data officer in the federal government, now to startup founder. What's the mission of Ian Kalin's career?
I am passionate about improving government services. I care about what our government does for us as citizens, and I've found lots of ways to help them out.
Man, it's almost like he planned for that question. That's pretty good.
It comes up a bit. You can also say I'm addicted to heavily regulated industries. I've been a politics geek since I was a kid. I love thinking about democracies and power structures and what we do with our tax dollars. And so I've found a way to learn about that space in a lot of different angles, in healthcare, in civic engagement, police forces, fire chiefs, stuff like that. And now I'm back in national security, a market that honestly I ran away from for a number of years for lots of reasons, which we may get into. But I'm very proud and humbled to be back in that market.
Let's jump in. Let's go spicy right out of the gate here. We're 3 months away from a presidential election. You've worked in government, you've worked around politics and all this stuff, and you're still passionate about democracy and government. Does our government, are we functioning as a representative democracy today from a business perspective? The ways that which you access the federal government, does that live up to our highest ideals?
I once ran for political office, and I came in almost dead last. Our company, Turbine One, is explicitly nonpartisan, by the way. It's one of the founding principles about what we do. Is just like with those that are serving as warfighters in uniform, they care about our nation. They don't care about the party that's leading at the time or the appropriations committee staff. That is not what drives their mission. That said, there are very clear connections between the future of what our nation prioritizes and what my company works on. And as one political connection between what you see in the news, and this is a non-answer to your question, but as one very clear connection to what you see in the news and what my company works on. A lot of international partners are curious and concerned about the future of American commitments. For example, if America chooses to prioritize certain overseas conflicts, invest in defending our partners with resources and ammunitions and training support and all those things, then that is an area where a company like mine can support. My company, maybe we'll get into it a bit later, is focused on the warfighter, helping them stay safe. And so depending on where political leadership chooses to focus will drive where my company focuses. And so, yeah, what you see in the news is not some creative fictional story of, big, powerful things far away. It actually becomes very personal because it comes down to quite literally where my team flies to in a few months. Right. And so that's where it gets very specific and connected to what's happening at the political echelons.
It's a great through line. It's clearly somebody who has some experience with electoral politics, which I love. Tell us a little bit about Turbine One. What are you doing? And even more importantly, why are you doing this now?
I wish I had this product back when I served. I mentioned I've had a lot of jobs in a lot of places. I've had the joy of serving in lots of different levels of government and public service. My career started out of college in the U.S. Navy. I was a counterterrorism officer supporting maritime interdiction operations. Frankly, I wish I had this product back then. It would have helped me stay safer. It would have helped my sailors stay safer and accomplish their missions better. Back then, 20 years ago, the global world of tech wasn't there to deliver the capabilities that we are now delivering. And so I wish we had it back then, but we don't. We didn't. Now, my company is focused on delivering that capability to those that are still serving in uniform. I have 3 kids. If any of them choose to serve in the military, I'm committed to making sure my software is going to help them stay safer. So that's why I'm fighting for what I'm fighting for. What we do is adversary detection. We're helping the good guys find the bad guys, whether it be autonomous craft or drones or Chinese destroyers masquerading as fishing boats in places that are highly illegal. Whatever the bad thing is, we're helping the good guys find, and maybe I shouldn't say that in the colloquial way, but helping the good folks find where threats exist. It's a software platform, hardware agnostic, any sensor, any data, any place where folks are trying to make sense of overwhelming amounts of information. That's where our software becomes useful. We help folks find what they're looking for.
Give us a little bit behind the name, because when you hear Turbine One, I mean, and the Air Force for a while had an obsession with one everything, or Cloud One, Platform, everything was one.
Well, yeah, so many of them. Yeah.
What's behind the Turbine and the One?
The real story, honestly, I didn't come up with it. We have a co-founder, Dan Portillo. If he ever watches this podcast, I'm going to give him credit for it. Where our company started was not as a automating military intelligence software platform. We actually started quite publicly as a lab. And the idea was that we were going to create faster prototypes, spin them out faster, and have a constant rotation of new ideas, new businesses, and then we're going to rotate new incubated ventures. Hence the nature of the turbine versus the classic phrase of a venture model, which is a reciprocating pump of one investment, wait 6 months, new idea, come back later. How do we accelerate this? And so the metaphor of the turbine made sense for that original business model. We learned with my co-founder, Matt Amaker, pretty early on that a lab is a terrible business. That just doesn't scale. It's very expensive people. You end up fighting over resources and not understanding why someone should cost more if they're more capable. The government struggles with that when they're trying to generally get to the lowest cost of anything. And so we pivoted a few months in, Turbine One, from the lab MVP as a service, lab product as a service, to having one very specific product that could scale across multiple branches.
Maybe this has to do with just the mission orientation of people in this space to kind of think, I want to build the studio, I want to do a venture studio, project studio, whatever it is. We're going to do a lot of things. Rebellion was like this. Anduril in some ways was like this. And then you end up finding a thing and realizing how hard and how much effort has to go into one thing and how big these markets are. And so you go all in as opposed to kind of sticking with that more kind of studio model. Although there are some, I guess, Red Cell and some others who have stuck to it.
Yeah. And the challenge with government in particular is that it takes so long to learn. The cycle times are generally so long. The iteration, the funding cycles are so protracted. Congress gets involved that it's hard to then have the fast pivot if you have to go 4 years into one piece of hardware only to realize that it's out of date. Right. And so there's extra complexity, I think, specific to the folks that are listening to this podcast that would understand and empathize with the fact that since it takes longer to iterate, the finding the right pivot is we're going to have to boil the ocean and then figure it out later. I think that's why a lot of companies go on that path. I think there's also a lot of systemic incentive towards, I'm going to be the everything company. Just give me the money and I'll figure it out later, which is usually a bad way to buy anything. I don't know if you bought a car, or bought a house, or did a bathroom remodel. But if you just say, I'm going to give the money to this contractor and we'll figure it out later, you're going to get the garbage that you deserve, frankly, if you don't know what you're buying. And so I think that's where the systemic infrastructure for these alleged systems integrators is really a bad process if you want to get a good product.
I think that's absolutely right. And I'm struck by the kind of intersection of the two conversations we've had here in the first 5 minutes, Ian, which is, on one hand, you are the person who has touched more kind of angles of sales and product than most, whether it was serving in uniform, whether it was building commercial companies, whether it was taking over a federal agency from a chief data officer perspective, running it on the inside. You've seen it from every angle. And then you said, okay, so we're going to build this kind of studio. We're going to do all these products. If anybody could kind of come and hack that system, you think it would be someone like you with your background who kind of understands all of the facets. So has it been smooth sailing? How quickly did you all go from zero to $1 billion company?
We're not $1 billion yet, but we're on our way. No startup should be smooth sailing, or else it's probably a bad startup. But we are trying to come at this market in a novel way. First of all, just being a pure form software company is weird for this market. So right off the bat, that's a challenge to the ecosystem. I obsess over how other companies in public service, governments, let alone the military, and national security and intelligence communities. I have been studying the successes and failures of other companies obsessively. I've been trying to learn as much as can be, listening to your podcast and others as well, by the way, as to like how does this happen? What are the rules? Even though I've been a practitioner, like I've been a senior acquisition official, I've been on the other side as a buyer and then to some extent as a frontline user. But that doesn't mean I have all the information. And the market is changing. Broadly speaking, there are new entrants that have, in many cases, changed the laws and regs about what even can be done in the first place. Anecdotes include Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. They have new buying authorities that didn't exist 5-10 years ago. Some of the famous stories about, we'll call it billionaire-backed startups, also known as Palantir, Anduril. What are some other ones again? I mean, it's the way AWS, SpaceX, Elon Musk, right? The way AWS broke into the IC. That's top down. That is a top down level of fame and influence and access that can drive fundamentally transformative new products, even if you have to sue the government to break it through. That's a game that billionaires can play. Most startups can't afford to sue the customer and get away with it. So I've learned about the oligopoly and measured their tool set. The founding ambition of my startup is that we can take advantage of some of those tools without having to come down through only that level of asymmetric access. Maybe the product can save a life. Maybe there is a widget that is essential to a warfighter. Can we get a person in uniform that says, I do not want to deploy without this, and damn it, don't you send me out there without it? Can that voice of the warfighter then translate into a commercial viable business? And that simplicity is also revolutionary to this market that does not want that to be true. The system, the quote unquote system of acquisitions, would amplify and celebrate certain things. That in many ways, of course, we're following all the laws and all the regs and all the NIST compliance paperwork and the ATOs and all the language of kind of the infrastructure for breaking into defense. But there are other ways to achieve some level of commercial success, which I guess my company and with extraordinary teammates, we have had some level of traction. But it's funny, right? And I'll close with this, but the measure of success, you mentioned billions. A small win in defense can be a transformative win to the venture capital community. A $5 million contract is a rounding error for most military budgets. If you came to any startup and said, hey, we got $5 million of ARR, how the hell did you do it? Right? So like there's just one of the many examples of how so many things get lost in translation between what is, I think, often described as the ecosystem of startups and entrepreneurial works and the venture world and the private equity world versus the defense world, which speaks a fundamentally different language.
I think it's absolutely right. All of that context is very helpful for, I think, the conversation that I want to have, which is let's get specific and go back to kind of day zero or day one, if you can, Ian, which is to lay out for folks what was kind of the plan, right? What was the day zero strategy for how we go from zero to initial kind of proof of concept? And then give us your Mike Tyson of what punched you in the face and how'd you respond?
Oh, we get punched in the face on a weekly basis. That's actually we know we're succeeding. We're starting to get people very angry about our sheer existence, was how you know you're starting to show up.
That's a good sign if you're making people mad. Yep.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. Even with Turbine One, I was just joking with my team that people are treating us differently now than they did a few years ago. Any startup struggles to get attention and access. What's easy for the military, throw a lot of bodies at it, is the opposite of what's easy for venture, fast product, new innovation, recruiting transformative builders. And yeah, Turbine One's getting to the level now where people are starting to notice us, which I guess why I'm on this podcast as well. It's kind of a funny piece for us. But yeah, so I mean, going back again to the why we fight for what we do, the product inspiration was very personal. It's what I wish I had in one of my worst days of life. The inspiration for me returning to the national security sector has to go to my co-founder, Matt Amaker, my CTO and extraordinary inventor for the business and a brilliant engineering leader. He asked the best questions about what I wish I had 20 years ago and then built the first prototype that launched the business. The capability to deliver situational awareness, target detection, automated threat recognition to environments that have no comms, have no cloud, and expecting that the end users will never code anything. Is there a no-code, simple toolkit to help people stay safer? It's, you can joke about what's the science fiction of, famous movies about being able to have eyes in the back of your head or just to be alerted when the bad guy jumps over a fence, right? It's that kind of capability that when built was the inspiration behind, I wish I had it. And then like a classic startup, you go out in the field and to be very concrete, one of the key lessons from Turbine One's early success was exercises. We had a hypothesis for what was needed by the military, but because I've been out of uniform for so long, I didn't know if it was still a gap. So there's lots of ways through all the innovation hubs, which I love and hate in their own way as to what they can do for any defense startup. But they can be very useful. And for us, it helped us learn, often for no money, by the way, what today's warfighters need. I frankly thought that in 20 years, a lot of this stuff had been, how much AI is put on the body of the modern soldier. Apparently nothing. And so I was like, oh, okay, good to know. I had no idea. So then when we learned that and said, okay, well, what then is useful for modern tech? What is normal in industry that can be transformational to the military sector that, broadly speaking, by every measure, is 10 to 20 years behind on basic capabilities? The laptops used, the sensors used, the network management, all the stuff that any modern tech company treats as baseline is transformative for lots of reasons. We're talking about the barriers to entry, but let's just define the problem. There's a gap. The capabilities are not in the hands of America's warfighters. So then what can be done about it? And so we learned from these exercises, specifically. In our case, it was data overload. There's a whole lot of intelligence analysts, military police, even the drones of autonomous warfare in the future of where defense is going. They are overwhelmed by data. Way too many megabytes, not enough eyeballs. And so when we saw this widening gap of people are getting overwhelmed, how can we provide some level of cognitive support? What the military calls as a doctrine decision advantage. If we can aid decision advantage as a top mission, and we learn that from field experience, we're able to iterate on our product and provide a tool set that empowers the person in that cycle rather than cutting them out.
Exercise is key part of that strategy. Had a hypothesis, needed to validate it. It's funny. This is one of, I think it feels like there should be another Newtonian law of maybe defense contracting, which is that for every opinion, there's an equal and opposite opinion. And so for every person who evangelizes for a military exercise and says, yes, go to guide, go to one of these things, it's useful. There's somebody who says exercises are a huge waste of time. Can you break that down for us, Ian? Where are exercises useful for you? And for a company that has not finding value there, what do you think their experience is, or why would they have that perspective?
I would love to hear more about people that are not finding exercises useful. I guess, when is it bad to spend more time with end users? In our experience, there is always value in understanding what people need, and especially if it's a large, ubiquitous problem. Maybe, to expand, I'm speculating on what the challenge is. Maybe it's, I learned about this stuff, but there's no money for it. And to that, if that is the nature, I would just say that is not wasteful per se, but is an aspect of our market. Broadly speaking, I wish there was rational economics. Supply and demand, better product at a cheaper price wins. That, in my opinion, is not how governments work, let alone defense markets. The way you price a product is very different, and there's institutional histories and a fantastic history of corruption that has led to a set of laws that basically drive a set of behaviors. Broadly, governments like buying widgets at the lowest cost, and they like spending billable hours on time and material contracts when they don't understand the scope. The problem with that history is that it's hardware-centric and misses what I loosely call the modern tech sector. And on the time and material side of how most governments build things, the incentives are all wrong. If I'm paying for something per hour, the incentive is book more hours. So if something breaks, the company that sold it makes more money. So guess what? Stuff breaks all the time. And we have the nerve to be surprised why it takes so long to get a ship out of a shipyard. How are you paying for it? Time and material? Well, guess what, man? What do you think was going to happen? And that drives me crazy that the incentives keep repeating the same mistake, and they have the nerve to be surprised when things are over budget and take too long. That may be, I think, that's the macro reality of the defense market. Why folks can say, I got a warfighter who loves it, but nothing happened with it. Okay, well, that is maybe common from an exercise. Again, I'm speculating if that's the feedback to it. I would say that at the same point, how does one leverage that field experience, that field report, the letter of support, whatever it may be, to then put it into a larger playbook? And maybe this is a bit of kind of an actionable topic to say, hey, if I'm a defense founder, like what I wish I had 2 years ago, I wish someone had told me more about the playbook to succeed. The voice of the warfighter is critical, but only one piece of the puzzle, and unfortunately is insufficient to make money happen for any new capability of any kind.
I'm torn. There's 3 different ways I want to go, but let's stay with this one, which is, I know we're riffing. I didn't tell you we were going to do this, but if you were going to voice over the playbook, if you were, let's say you're talking to Ian 5 years ago, and you're like, hey, let's create this thing on the fly, man. So point 1, voice the customer, necessary but not sufficient. What else belongs in that playbook? I'm
going to start by giving a reference and a shout out to some brilliant folks that have written down a lot of additional case studies and details, but I'll summarize some of it here. Marina Martin and Nick Sinai wrote a book. I think it's called Hack Your Democracy, something like that. I'm actually blanking on the name.
Hack Your Bureaucracy. Yeah.
Yeah. They have a brilliant collection of stories that are more actionable than what I'm going to summarize here for brevity. In my mind, there is a playbook for power structures, whether you're trying to change something inside of government, by the way, as well as sell something new from the outside. if I'm in the Department of Motor Vehicles and I want to take 100 forms and get them down to 10 forms, guess what? Someone's going to yell at you for something before you change it. There'll be antibodies to innovation that prevent you from streamlining something, because the reason there's 100 forms is that was the low risk perception of how to protect a process and, in theory, deliver a better service. So the system that exists today is considered lower risk. So how do you change something which is higher risk for the people that have ownership of it? It's basically mapping the power structures. Who can control how anything is changed? I would say there's 5 high-level buckets. You have your executive sponsor. Leadership matters in government. There has to be a champion, somebody who's going to be a fanatic for your change and is going to drive and set the tone and set the pace and be the insider to pull the stakeholders together. There needs to be the voice of the end user. In our case, that's the warfighter. That's the person in uniform that is working to keep our nation safe. The 2 other pieces, though, I think is where a lot of folks, especially in the startup world, get tripped up. One is the contracting vehicle, what I would call the acquisitions legality of who's allowed to spend money on anything different. And then fundamentally funding, budgets. Whether the military or companies like it or not, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress decides how money gets appropriated. And so now there's layers of bureaucracy there as well. But that is a stakeholder. If 3 generals love something, but 5 senators don't, well, that's a problem, right? And that's the nature of our competitive democracy and the systems of balance of power that we've established in this nation. To master all 5, again, executive sponsor, project champion, end user, contracting vehicle, and budget, those 5 are the levers to pull. And what we do on a weekly basis at our startup is obsess of the details of every column. If we have the voice of the warfighter and an admiral loves us, but there ain't no money, well, guess what? Then you're probably, as a business, not going to break through and succeed. And so that's where you end up saying, okay, well, how can one find ways to find unobligated funds, increase appropriations for the following year, partner with somebody else that already has a set aside for your category? That's where the creativity and the blocking and tackling comes in to break through with new business.
There is a growing recognition, but it's still kind of a young industry, gets more mature, that, hey, sales in federal space are complex, they're complicated, they take time, you need multiple legs of the stool. And more people are recognizing, I think, what you just shared, Ian, which is that each of these components matter. But there's still a question of how do you do that? How do you actually line those different players up? And so we kind of left off where you said, all right, Turbine One, day one, it was, let's take a product, let's get it to an exercise, which is really focused on one of those things, right? Or maybe 2, in that you do build some visibility with some champions and some kind of executive sponsors even, but it really is about the voice of the end user and having it in the hands of a customer or of a warfighter for the most part. Let's pick back up with that story. As you start getting traction, as you start getting the feedback you're looking for in those exercises, what's kind of the next step? Where did you all go from there?
The market matters. For any startup, nuclear power, supply chain logistics, a new rifle mount, whatever it is, like there's reasons to be inspired for that new capability. The military is going to ask, what's the requirement for this? How do I know that I need it? And that's the market. And so the inconvenience of timing for every startup, a lot of great startups, maybe they were 5 years too early, maybe they were 5 years too late. In our case, working in the intelligence community and with intelligence operations, we studied who's working there and what are their requirements? What are they already looking for? And that's that product market fit. Doesn't matter how good our widget is, are the people looking for something that happens to be an urgent need? And so I'll give it a shout out to some real world examples. There's a director of a task force in the Army. His name is Andrew Evans. This is the ISR task force, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Task Force. They have a complex and urgent mission. They're supporting Army intelligence. The head of Army intelligence today, Lieutenant General Tony Hale, has made it clear that there's a number of strategic and tactical priorities. The number one tactical priority that Lieutenant General Tony Hale published a couple of months ago is automating the processing of intelligence data. Nothing to do with any company, happens to be, apparently, his number one priority. Well, guess what my company does for a living, right? We happen to be doing that. That's helpful in then connecting, all right, leadership priority, lots of reasons why that has been prioritized by the general. We're one of the capability providers in that market. We were able to connect with a testing and a development organization that cares about that. And then it comes down to some of the great leadership from Andrew Evans. He said, all right, on an example engagement with our company, we're going to go forward and find a way to field it, test it, and see if it's ultimately valuable. So that's a bit of the recipe.
So it's putting together the requirements with the people and the capability that you have to make this happen. again, I think conceptually folks will follow that. That makes sense. At the same time, there's also folks who have been in this industry for a little while who have seen the whitewashing of, as new requirements come out, everybody, old capabilities are new again, right? I think about autonomy. AI is probably the most commonly cited example, which is overnight we had a lot of large incumbents that became modern AI companies, right? There were marketing campaigns plastered on DC Metro and on Nat's Ballpark about AI companies that had been AI companies perhaps all along, because the government, now all of a sudden had a requirement for artificially intelligent systems. So tell us about, like, how is this game really played? When you think about for you all to get that meeting and for you all to stand out in a pool of folks where I'm sure you were not this was not an uncontested field. What are some of the things that you see and how do you navigate that?
So a few fun stories to share. I remember we were at a conference once, and for the engineers that may be listening, we focus on the edge of machine learning being no cloud, no networks. Can you still build, deploy, iterate, tune a new machine learning model? For those that are engineers listening, you may wonder, how is that possible? Well, we have some inventions around that, miniaturizing machine learning, providing a level of simplicity to the user, things like it. But we're basically an edge ML company for the engineer's perspective. So when we went to a conference once, set up a booth, looked across the aisle, and saw right across from us, it said edge, machine learning, and AI. We went in our heads, we said a bunch of expletives, and we're like, competitor right across from us. How are we going to deal with this? And then they set up the full booth. It was a shoe company. Boots. They sold boots. And so I'm like, wait, what? But they had AI all over their banners and their thing. And also how they did the treads of the grips of the bottom of the shoe. And I'm like, come on, y'all. This is just, you all are just putting AI in everything, sprinkling it everywhere as if it's going to help you. And maybe they're a fantastic boot. Maybe a very comfortable shoe. I have no clue. There is a poisoning of the well in this category because people are throwing words around with absolutely no idea what the hell it means. So yes, but that's blanketed, bleached out the level of interest. People don't say that anymore. If you're a new company in that space, you're just going to get an eye roll from a senior military leader who's another damn AI company. What am I supposed to do with this? And by the way, they don't really care about AI. AI is a means, as a brand perhaps, but the warfighters aren't asking for AI. They're asking for capabilities. They want to do targeting faster. They want to fly the plane faster. Like, that's what people should care about. And if any startup entrepreneur is leading with an AI story, you're dead on arrival, because that's not actually what the most forces actually need. That's one perhaps entertaining story. Other stories in the space that get in that way, there is an oligopoly of military procurement. I've actually been very inspired by many, many brilliant warfighters that teach me about new technologies and employment methods for different types of advanced computing. Where I've seen the most egregious, most offensive activities is from other companies. And these are, in theory, other Americans fighting for the same thing. And I've seen the most fantastic waste, fraud, and abuse. I've had another prime contractor on a pretty significant contract award at first glance claim that when they added their management fee, there was going to be no money left for us. Sorry. And they said, no, actually. We've had, as a regular engagement on the AI side in particular, the people need to be very careful with contracts. We've seen some businesses put as a default mode, whatever software you build is automatically ours, and we own it forever. No company, you're not going to get that either. So that's routine. So what do you call that? Is that corruption? Is that fraud? Is it bad acting? No, it's kind of the culture. It's a level of entitlement and expectation that they own some piece of this market or real estate or relationship or whatever, and any new capability fundamentally doesn't belong. That is the challenge of the game. Quote unquote, we talked a little bit, Noah, before about the game. That is the game. I can hate the game or I can win the game. And there's this level of expecting some amount of that to happen, because bad actors, even on our own team, will treat each other like this, even if we're mission driven, even if we're aligned on the outcomes for the warfighter. Expecting that to happen then allows an entrepreneur to say, okay, I know that this is in my future. How do I plan for that? How do I expect that someone's going to try to abuse us? And then find the power structures to say, when they try to steal our intellectual property, we have predicted that and have the structures in place to ensure that that doesn't actually happen. And I think that's the playbook. That goes back to, I've seen this before, so we know how to prepare for it and then find a way to overcome.
Those stories are kind of eye-popping and hard to believe, and on one hand, and on the other hand, they're almost expected, I think, for folks who have kind of been around some of this work. And this is Noah speaking, Nadia. And so let me say two things on these points, because I think the stories are important, and it's crucial that folks who are entering this industry, especially those coming from big tech or commercial industry who have not worked in or served in or worked with the government, that you do understand that this ecosystem is different. Mainly because what we don't want to see happen, and we talk about this in VC a lot, which is if these companies don't exit, if they don't have great outcomes, is the venture money going to dry up? That's one side of the equation. The other side is if you're a great technical founder or you are a mission-driven builder or operator who wants to contribute in these industries and you don't recognize what you're up against institutionally, you're going to get burnt out and then you're going to run away screaming and jaded and you're going to make a bunch of decisions that's throw it all away, start from scratch. A lot of what you described, Ian, I think some of it may be malicious. Much of it is very likely legacies of a system that are used to works for hire in software development, where you're paying engineers hourly rates to develop software that then is your property. There's this balance between kind of Occam's and Hanlon's razor, which is like do not assume necessarily malevolence. And it also gets hard because there are points at which there are some people who just will do exactly what they can get away with. There are others who are just operating, under the incentive structures that they have been, brought up in. And so I think your perspective on this, Ian, and like how you actually overcome that and have not taken your ball and gone home and have not left and just gone back to the big tech world, but are still in this fight and are winning in this fight. That perspective is so important and so unique and so differentiated.
I think you said it better than me, with the exception of winning. I don't think we're quite winning yet. I think we're early innings, to use a sports analogy. First quarter, we're charging forward, and I feel grateful for how much progress we've made as a young business that is so mission-driven. I liked your point about those individual behaviors and the structural behaviors. I think you're right. I completely agree. I'm going to interview you. I want to put a podcast on Noah because you've clearly seen this stuff as well. I can say in organizational structures and incentives drive individual behaviors. And there's also diversity. I've told, 2 or 3 stories of big companies being terrible. In balance, there are other companies that have been spectacular, brought us into opportunities that I never expected, found ways to ultimately help our widget be delivered into a larger ecosystem. It's not all good. It's not all bad.
Yep.
There may be a few surprises and some, you said the Mike Tyson punch to the face, but it does take grit for any founder to succeed, any small business to break through. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was, everyone else would have done it already. It's supposed to have some complexity and iteration and mistakes, but that's just how you do it. You get back up, you get back in there, you learn from it. And frankly, even some of the folks that have tried to do bad things to our business ultimately teach us a few things about how the system works. So I'm actually grateful for the bruises. I think we've learned a lot from it.
Thank you, Mr. Prime, for trying to steal my IP.
It's actually,
thank you, sir. Yeah. May I have another?
It's funny. I mean, very technically, we part of what we do at Turbine One is we've been very focused on recruiting. We recruit folks with an extraordinary amount of skill in narrow areas, or let's say specific areas. It's part of our unique hiring hypothesis. But we're not building a team of professional, we'll call them defense or government salespeople. But those people, if you're a 30-year colonel, how many software licenses have you reviewed in your career? Probably not a lot. But in civilian world now, a lot of our folks are pretty good at looking at software licenses and realizing how important that is. So yeah, I think there is lessons from those that are trying to do bad things to us.
Short of just keeping an army of lawyers at the ready, what have you learned about how to do these well in a way that with trust and that protects your interests while also achieving the objective, which is getting in the game faster?
I love my lawyers. I don't know. I think that made me sound like they're not worth their money. I think they're fantastic.
I would never accuse a lawyer of not being worth their money, of course.
I think they're incredible. If you need the lawyer to revert back to the contract, you're probably already in trouble. I think it does come down to trust and alignment and incentive. You have to trust the individual. There's reference checks, all the normal stuff that any business would do. In our case, we are a software product. And just like Microsoft Excel, it needs a laptop, right? So there's a hardware component to every software. So that's a big part of what we do at our business. Being a software company that has never charged a billable hour, there are some folks that are very good with very, robust clearances and global deployments that can install a mobile app and a cell phone, and you have to rely on those companies to be a footprint in other time zones. I think those are great. Those are very synergistic partnerships that make sense for our business. Every business is going to be different there. But when the tech is aligned that well, you don't have to worry too much about the intrinsic risk of abuse from competitive markets. If you're fundamentally different businesses, it should work out great. We also at Turbine One have invested in good advisors that help us avoid the pitfalls and potholes or companies and markets to avoid. I'm very grateful for our board of advisors. You see a lot of defense companies do this, perhaps like a collection of general officers, a lot of stars on websites. That can be useful for brand recognition. Maybe it helps with sales. A lot of it's just figuring out who not to trust. And that, I think, is one of the underappreciated aspects of getting those advisors on your business. I would say another part of what we do specifically at our company that helps us, it comes down to the product. We're enabling a new capability that wasn't possible before. So a lot of, and this is a little techie, model builders love us because we open up a market that they could never access. If their model only works in the cloud, we can make it work on the edge, then they would want to work with us. And that's probably half of our partnerships today, enabling an app ecosystem, a model ecosystem that physically wasn't possible.
Awesome. So as you look forward, Ian, we brought up where y'all started. Where are you today as a company? What's kind of the future trajectory of Turbine One? Where are you in your own journey, kind of across the valley of death, and what are the big milestones on the horizon?
Yeah, lots of ways to measure that. Again, this goes back to the numbers of, what's big in venture is of no historic consequence to the defense industry. We're early days by all objective measures. We obviously want to grow our influence. We want to learn more, faster, all of those things. I would advertise for any defense entrepreneur, national security entrepreneur, there are traditional metrics that always come up. They always come up. How do you get past small business innovation research grants, also known as SIBRs, into transition programs, StratFi, AppFit, Raider, Project Replicator, things like that, and then ultimately programs of record. Those are what I would call the traditional benchmarks of a small business becoming a big business in defense. And so everyone's looking towards that program of record. How do you get there? So we are on a similar path, just like every other startup. I think there's also the question of, if you're serving the warfighter, what about the intelligence community? What about the joint partners? Are you selling in Europe? Those are other classic questions that always come up. And of course, we're going to be answering those in the coming years. And then for any capability, what we're doing at Turbine One is really democratizing AI, making it super easy for anyone to build a detector to keep them safe. My kids prototype our products. My children can use it. So if it's just that darn simple, where else can it go is a classic question that, of course, my investors ask all the time. Of course they do. Right? And that becomes a question of then, well, how does one structure a business to serve commercial or industry or enterprise different than the Army, Navy, Air Force? Right? Those are the classic questions that all businesses go through, and we're going to go through those in the coming years.
I think you're being maybe overly generous or maybe overly harsh to yourself in saying all companies are on that path, because they're not. There are a lot of companies, we don't talk to many of them on this show, but there are a lot of companies that are very content to live in, I won't use the word Cyberland, that dink and doink without stitching things together in a path to something that matters at scale. You can make a living in the federal government doing things that don't matter.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I was myopic in my answer, thinking I was speaking I was literally talking to other founders that are also venture backed. So I was in the echo chamber for a second. You're right. That can be a wonderful business. I'm in the business of scale and platform growth. There can be a great, beautiful lifestyle business of consulting on the side for a testing lab and a military base. We need that. My ambition for Turbine One is much bigger than that. I believe the reason for that is what I've learned from the warfighters. The degree to which the problem we've diagnosed is widely felt is so large that it keeps me up at night urgently trying to find more ways to help more people. That's worth fighting for. That's worth spending a little less time doing the things, the fun stuff, to work a little harder, because there is a larger mission. It is so urgently needed to keep people safe that it's worth committing years of your life to, especially if it's already been proven in so many environments that I know intimately. And the people I'm surrounded by know the mission better than me because they served a hell of a lot longer than I did. And they are more recently out of uniform to know that this is not a distant memory for them. It is very intimate. It's their neighbors, it's their friends, it's the retirement ceremony that they're going to right now, where they're saying, why isn't this capability out there? Because I'm concerned about accomplishing my mission. That's the stuff that drives a higher level of ambition and goes, for me, a simple innovation grant for something. That's great. That's wonderful. Good on you. But if you want to be operational, there has to be a higher level of ambition to break into a very large and complex system.
I think a fair and if not profound reflection. I'd ask you to even pull up one more level. So you've kind of described where you and the company are at. As you look across this industry, and you've seen it from a lot of different angles over the years, where do you think defense tech as a category is right now? Are you bullish or bearish? What do you think the months and years ahead have in store for this influx of company capital and just human interest?
I'm bullish because the points on the board. The evidence is showing that new capabilities are urgently needed and can become viable businesses. I think the canonical example of that right now is DIU, Defense Innovation Unit. Great new director, Doug Beck, incredible team there, and by far the most, in my opinion, my experience, the most knowledgeable staff and administrative functions, from the contracting officer to the security leads. They know modern tech better than just about any other organization I've worked with. I'm so impressed with DIU. And from that staff, they've been able to earn enough points with companies that have had breakthrough success and programs of record and those milestones that I was talking about before, that they're getting points on the board. They're getting more money. They're getting more staff. They may only do, 50 solicitations a year. So as a percentage of total DoD budget, not a whole lot, really. But that's the measure of success. If you look up at the sky at night and it's mostly dark, do you focus on the stars or the darkness? I look up at the sky at night and I see the stars and I think the stars are winning. Even if by a fractional measurement of percentage, it's not that much light in the sky, I'm inspired by the light. I think that's the analogy to take forward to DIU and companies like mine. That, we're small, but we're winning and we're growing and we're getting points on the board. And from that level of success, I think there's more opportunities to inspire others to get involved in this fight, join this ecosystem, and push the sector forward.
I love it. And I agree. So, Ian, speaking of that, if folks do want to get involved with your mission or follow along and with Turbine One and what everything y'all are doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Apply now. I'm recruiting all over the place. So just about every position you can think of probably has a job posting on turbineone.com. Or it might be category, not every position. Even as a small business, though, we have a very high bar. There's other laws of nature. I'm a nuclear engineer by training, and so I think a lot about physics in how we grow a business. As you increase the quantity of something, there is a quality concern that naturally happens in any organization. Even DIU may be asking those questions, and I think they're doing a damn good job with it. For us, it is an opportunity to join our mission as a teammate. As you've mentioned, we have a lot of partners. If companies are mission aligned and perhaps motivated by the same things we are, we'd love to find new ways to partner with them. We have dozens of partnerships and probably need dozens more. And then, of course, to the extent that there are warfighters and service members listening that are urgently concerned with overwhelmed folks, overwhelmed analysts, that too much data, too much intel, too many ints, not enough eyeballs to process it, reach out to us directly, and happy to provide examples of how other folks are solving that problem.
Fantastic. Ian Kalin, thanks for taking the time. Good luck on everything you're doing. We're rooting for you. It's been cool to watch the journey so far and excited for what's to come.
Thank you, Noah. Please continue this podcast. I've learned a lot from it, and I want to keep hearing your stories.
Thank you, sir.